The mailman doesn't deliver on a Sunday.
If you don't like that, you don't like NBA basketball.
Anthony for three. Bang! J.R. Smith! We just saw men fly. LeBron James with no regard for human life.
Cleveland! This is for you!
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Coast to Coast. I am Ronan Gaine. Joining me as always, Chris Nambu. Look at this. We're finally recording in the same time zone and the same country.
Are we still speaking the same language, though? I'm not sure.
Close enough, yeah. But we'll get there. We gotta mix things up now. You know, now I've changed cities, so now we gotta change the languages too. We'll get it all mixed up. Got a fun podcast today. We're going to be discussing a bit on point guards. We heard Damian Lillard talking this week about he thinks of himself as the best once he's out on that court, and Steph Curry has also labeled himself the best this offseason. We'll have a little discussion on that. We'll be heading over to the Throwback Corner to talk a little bit about Phil Jackson, the greatest coach of all time. We'll see how that goes. Then I'll finish off with a little Ronan top 5 list and the tier list from last ep that we didn't get to. That's going to be a lot of fun. Before we get into it, though, Chris, how you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm hanging on by a thread, just like your Wi-Fi connection. So a little disclaimer: if we have any cutouts, we are started from square one, recording from a hotspot. But right now, I'm at the end of my rotation here. It's getting a little busy. I know you've been busy moving over to New York, so we're both busy parts of the year, opposite from what we're seeing in the NBA. So it'd be good to just take a break here, talk some randomness about point guards, talk some cool stuff about Phil. So I'm looking forward to it, man. How are you doing? Settling in? Look at you. You have a painting. Is there a painting on the wall back there?
Yeah.
It's a little surprising for me. Okay.
A little different bit of background. It's still very white, though, so I didn't want to change too much. You know, I got to...
Different than a bare wall. I'm liking it already. It's a good
there we
change.
go. It's a change up. And it'll only get better from here, believe me. Yeah, no, I'm doing good. I've adjusted to the time switch and things like that. So now I'm ready to blow off a bit of steam, talk a bit of basketball here. We'll start straight into it. The point guards, Damian Lillard this week speaking about himself, talking about how he believes that he is the best point guard in the league. When he's out in that court, there's no one better than him. What do you take from that? What do you think about that? When you think of a point guard, would you think Damian Lillard and you think he's the best? Is that would that be?
Well, I will
say
thoughts? This: when he had his 32 point per game season, I want to say it was right before the bubble, and he was I think a lot of people were comparing him to Steph. So I think that there was definitely a quick point in time where that was a legitimate question. I think where the Blazers have gone, obviously it's not gone his way, but he's there. He's there. He's never had the same structure as Steph has had. He's never had the same, maybe you could argue that a guy like Chris Paul has done more on his own, depending on the team. The more traditional point guard like him has been able to be the best point guard in the league at times because he's a traditional point guard. But Dame as that dynamic scoring guard, like he has an argument to make for himself. Although I will say that, Steph has proven it too when the Warriors were down bad without anybody for the past couple of years before they got themselves back in order. He had an MVP type year without anybody around him. So I think I still got to say that Steph is the best point guard in the league still right now. But I think a more interesting question now is, if I get that out of the way, is how close is a guy like Shea? How close is a guy like Luka? How close is a guy like Ja?
Yeah, Shea's the interesting one. Like I wouldn't, in my mind, I wouldn't picture Shea as a point guard. Maybe just not a traditional one. I would just when I think of his game, I think of him as being a bit more of a two guard, kind of similar to when you think of like a Kyrie Irving or someone like that. But it's definitely an interesting conversation. Like Luka is the one that you think is the one who's right on the cusp of kind of breaking into that best in the league sort of realm. He's the one that we kind of were waiting on him to do it, because as like the likes of Dame and Steph get up there in age and kind of move into the last few years of their career, is it time for Luka to take that step now? But Shea's definitely one then that sneaks in, because even like in terms of like his style of play and his control of the game, like it's similar enough to what you see from a guy like Damian Lillard. But I don't know, just so far in my mind, I would think of him more as the two guard, even though I know he's playing the point in OKC.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and it's just based on like facilitating, and I think Shea's traditionally a combo guard, especially what we've seen with him, as a young player coming up with Chris Paul and Dennis Schroeder, what he's able to do, playing off ball and such. But I think his versatility doesn't go against him necessarily. I think that's what makes him potentially a better player than Dame next year, is that versatility, and his ability defensively as well. I think that's one thing that's going to set Shea apart from Luka and Dame is his defensive ability. If he can keep being a productive defensive player, if he can continue to be great on ball, getting steals, really be using his size to his advantage. And that's something that Dame's never been able to do. And that's something that Luka has not been able to take advantage of his size because he's never been in shape for a full year to really use it. And I think too, Luka as a rebounder has an argument to be made there. What he can do in the low post, and what he can do against smaller guards, that's something that Dame can't do. So I think Dame is solidly in that conversation, but he's not alone. He's not alone. And I think it's interesting when you talk about Shea too, because Curry is this off-ball machine. Like when he has the ball in his hands and he's doing pick and roll, like he's one of the best pick and roll players in the world. So that's not to say you can't do it, but he plays at such a different level, different way, different flavor, that when we talk about like what's the best point guard, what's the most important attributes for a point guard to have. I mean, if you just go down the list, like there's not a lot of guys who are just like a traditional point guard. Like you don't really have that anymore. Like if you're just going down by PER, like Luka, very different. Shea, very different. Lillard, different. Curry, different. Tyrese, like I think Halliburton has a little bit more of that traditional point guard vibe to him. Ja, just like a D Rose type, incredibly athletic. He's using his athleticism to get to the rim and creating off of that, but not really that pure tactical point guard. Trey maybe is a little bit more like that, but he's mostly looking for his shot. Kyrie, same thing. De'Aaron Fox kind of say like there's nobody really in the best. Like Chris Paul is kind of like he's a relic at this point when you talk about the best point guards of the league. So it's interesting, like when you think about like who is quote unquote the best at being a traditional point guard, I don't think any of those guys are in a top 10 for point guards at all anymore.
Yeah, that's probably fair. I think, I like that you mentioned Halliburton. I think he's kind of the guy that I look at as being like a traditional point guard, the one that I look at and think, oh, like he is the legit point guard. He's the guy who controls the game. He's got good size. He's got good length and good IQ, obviously, and especially his addition to the modern game. He's got a really solid, efficient 3-point shot. And I think that's a big plus for the modern day point guard, especially when you can get into a situation where you can like fake a pass and pull a step back and hit a 3, which he can do. That's an important aspect. That's why I look at him as, obviously I'm not going to say he's better than Curry or Dame or Luka, but in terms of a traditional point guard, I think is the guy that really fits that mold, especially for the modern day. When you look at like the most important kind of skills that you'd want in your point guard, I'd always look at kind of size, IQ, and passing. And then in the modern day, you add that efficient 3-point shooting as well. And that's Tyrese Halliburton all over.
Yeah, it seems like having a point guard is kind of an afterthought when you're thinking about, having a wing. When you have a point guard, he's like a complementary piece, and some of the best teams in the last decade have had more so complementary shooting point guards. And that's what you've seen alongside LeBron. And the way that you've seen Golden State use point guards, they've been shooters, and they've had playmaking from guys like Draymond Green, from Iguodala, and it's interesting that the way that the game is played today, it's positionless, and you can get playmaking from your center. The Denver Nuggets have a guy, Giannis is a guy. How often is everything going through guys like Embiid? How often is everything going through guys like Jason Tatum, where guys like Green? I always call Derek White Green. It never leaves me. That never leaves me. But him and Brogdon, it's interesting to see that that point guard. If you were to watch basketball in the 80s and 90s, even the early 2000s, like what was expected from that position is very different now. It feels like obviously it kind of is a throwback to what you saw from Kobe, what you saw from MJ, and you got your Steve Kerrs, you got your Derek Fishers, you got point guards that are more contributing to the way they stretch the floor and the way they're just going to control the game as a secondary playmaker. But yeah, all these guys that are point guards. I look at it in the way that just going back to Dame here. Who do I want to control the game the most out of any of these players? And I think that I would take Luka if I'm being honest. Like when it comes to the offensive end of the floor, I think Luka has the best processing speed of anyone in the league except for LeBron. Like him and LeBron are on the same level in terms of processing. What I mean by that is, no matter where they on the floor, what play that they're running, they're making the right pass the second it's there. Not even the second they're seeing it before it happens.
Mhm.
And that's something that you see at times, but Luka does that all the time. It's like it's all game long. He's always making the right play. And I feel like that's a little bit different from what Dame brings, which is, he's an aggressive scorer and he's going to shoot the lights out. And he's a lot more dynamic as a 3-level scorer than Luka is at times. Even than Shea is, because he doesn't have that same level as a 3-point shooter. But I think that's what sets Luka apart. And if we're just going to talk honestly about who's the real, true best point guard in the league, and you're talking just about the passing, the IQ, and all that, I would say I would still stick with Luka.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And then the final question on then: does Luka win MVP this year?
It just comes down to the Mavs. Honestly, it comes down to the Mavs. Like we'll see what we get out of Luka this season. We're not gonna pretend like some Instagram photos and some showing out in FIBA World Cup are enough to convince us, because we say that every year. But it takes his defense just not being horrible in the effort. You can't. I think it would be pretty damning for me if Luka comes out again this year and it's just poor effort. Another year of poor effort would tell me that this is just who he's going to be. And it doesn't matter who else you put on this team, because the Mavs need to be good in order for him to win MVP. That's just what it is, because he's already an MVP level player, but the effort needs to be there, and the team success has to be there, and the defense is going to have to step up, and he needs to be at least not take away from what they're going to do on that end of the floor.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Well, that's an interesting thought to close out that conversation. But yeah, definitely keep an eye on the. We always say, we always keep an eye on Luke and the Mavs, but let's see what, like you said, can the defense step up? Even just like you said, just be there, be wanting to be a defender when you're on that end of the floor. That's a very minimal thing, but it's actually important when it comes to Luka Doncic. But switching over to the throwback corner. Been a few weeks since we've been there, but there's one guy I think needs to be mentioned here, and it's a guy that's kind of forgotten about because of his last endeavor in the NBA was such a disaster in the head office of the New York Knicks that people have kind of forgotten about what he did as a coach and the elite level that he was at for 15, nearly 20 years. Phil Jackson, the winningest and, in my opinion, the best coach of all time.
So he's got 13 rings, to say the least. And then who else has 13 rings? 2 as a player, 11 as a coach. Coach 2, the greatest of all time. When you mention the Knicks, though, it immediately brings a question to my head. Because we're going to talk about all the positives, and I think it's cool to ruminate on all the cool things that he's done. But I feel like his time in the Knicks really not just like kind of sours that, like in your recent memory of who Phil Jackson is in the face of the NBA, but kind of what we feel like we've learned he stands for. Because it felt like in New York, a lot of it was about stubbornness of his philosophy and his ego and how he wanted the team to be, and not really, and how that just clashed with Melo and the team in general. Like you probably have a better sense of it than I do, but like what was your perception if you're just thinking about his time in the Knicks?
It's just the simple thing. Like not everyone can do it all. Like Phil Jackson was an elite, the best coach that you could get. But when you get into the positions of more power and you're making more important decisions, and it's a kind of a broader spec, sometimes you just can't do it. And unfortunately, he was probably thinking of how great he was as a coach and thinking that he'd be able to slide in seamlessly to those sort of roles, like similar like to a Pat Riley sort of vibe there. But unfortunately, it just doesn't always come together like that. And when you've had the success that you had, you're gonna stay stubborn, and unfortunately, that's gonna rub the wrong way if things aren't going well. And that's ultimately the way that it worked out. It was as things got worse, I think he probably got more stubborn and was less willing to wriggle, and then it eventually just blew up and it just looked like a complete disaster.
Yeah, which is in stark contrast to his history with the Lakers, his history with the Bulls. And I spent some time just like who better to know his impact on those teams than the players he coached, just listening to interviews from Kobe, from MJ, from Rodman, from Kerr, from Pippen, from Lakers staff. And it's very obvious to see that everyone who studied his philosophy is that a lot of it is about where he comes from and what he believes in terms of understanding others, in terms of having empathy, in terms of like promoting a peaceful environment to learn. And just like it's odd that you have these two vicious competitors really that are the face of Phil Jackson's legacy, but the underlying message that he imparted to them was like learning, was like respecting your opponent, was kind of like this Zen, came from his like Zen Buddhist background. And that's interesting to me because you see like a competitor like that, and it's almost like Phil Jackson was the necessary component to calm that down and to take a deeper look. I mean, Kobe talked about how he learned spirituality and mindfulness of the game, and how like to quiet his ego, and that's a similar kind of thing that Jordan talked about as well. Both those guys cut from very similar cloth, and I think you don't see that very often in the league where you have such contrasting characters in terms of a coach and a player, and it works out. Usually, like if they're clashing like that, it doesn't. And then the coach is gone. Very few times where you see such a successful relationship. So I think it's cool to see to really think about it, and how that he was the perfect kind of guy to guide them, just as like people, fundamentals, and their mentality.
Absolutely, and I like you see the way that obviously. I like read his biography, and like I've seen like his flips in The Last Dance, to like the things that he's trying to get the teams to do, like the all the stuff like the Zen Buddhism stuff and different things like that, and you're thinking like this guy is a complete whack job. It's like how and the fact that he was able to convince these guys to buy in. Maybe you could just say, oh, he only had to convince a Kobe or an MJ, and the rest would just follow in. Even at that level, like to be able to convince those guys to buy into that side of it, and it works so successfully over such a long period. Like it's really impressive, and he's a very impressive person. I'd recommend anyone to read his book, because it's really interesting to get an insight into his life and into his beliefs, because the way it brought success to the Chicago Bulls and to the Los Angeles Lakers was just at a level that we've never seen. I mean, you forget that MJ and Kobe, zero rings without Phil Jackson. They had a combined 3 conference finals appearances without Phil Jackson, won just a total of 8 playoff series. Like, he was a ginormous part of their success, and it's never really talked about enough. Like, without Phil Jackson, neither of those two guys won anything.
Yeah, and I think it's fair too to look at it the opposite way too, that that was like the perfect pairing, those two guys with Phil Jackson, because what did Phil Jackson do as a coach without them? Those are his only 2 major stints. He didn't coach any other teams. No. So that's it. I mean, 2 great situations to be in as a coach.
You earned that right though. You earned the right to coach the best.
Exactly. But I think, I mean, just to preach on that idea a little bit, I think that just goes to show, just not even just basketball, but in life too. Like when you have different perspectives, when you have different ways of approaching things, like Kobe and MJ are guys who just want to run through a wall. And they needed somebody like him to be, to stick on the Buddhism thing, like the yin to their yang, just like the complete opposite in a way. And if you don't have the right collection of perspectives in the same room, then maybe you don't achieve the ultimate goal. And I think it's a perfect example of that. And I think shout out to, like, if you've watched The Last Dance, if you've read the biography, if you've looked into these teams, I actually didn't know that Tex Winter not only was a part of the Bulls, but he actually was recruited over to the Lakers as well. I didn't know that he actually he followed Phil to the Lakers and coached Kobe as well. I think it's very forgotten about when you hear Phil Jackson. Like the first thing you think about in terms of X's and O's is fill in the blank, triangle offense. And that's all Tex Winter. Like all that whole philosophy is all Tex Winter. And he doesn't get enough credit for what he did on both those teams. And I think I don't know, if this is, being a little too reductionist, thinking about like what exactly these guys were good at or not good at. But if a lot of the X's and O's really came from Tex Winter, how much of Phil Jackson's influence is more so fundamentals and philosophy, and without Tex Winter and just kind of applying the strategy to the Knicks, if it was just not really thought through. Like his philosophy was there, but maybe that wasn't the correct sort of system to impart, and that's kind of what led to the downfall, because they just tried to just bring that offense to the Knicks, and I don't think that system was there. That was not. They were not built for that, really.
Yeah. I think obviously it's you buy into winning, and then you can buy into that system. Like this is a guy that obviously when he first joined the Lakers, like he got Shaq to come out and meet him out in his out in basically it was like a swamp where he was basically living out there in his little outhouse out there fishing and everything. Got Shaq to come out and see if he was going to be willing to run through a wall for him, basically be willing to just focus on basketball, just focus on winning, and see if he was willing to make that move, because he knew like this Phil Jackson, he only knew that unless Shaq was there to buy in, he was ready to do it all to win, there was going to be no way of having success with that team. Obviously, Shaq convinced him, and then he comes in, they go and do a three-peat. I mean, he had 3 three-peats during his career as a coach. Like it's crazy to think of, and 55 wins in 16 of 20 seasons, and only one coach of the year. That kind of crazy to think of?
That is crazy thing. And I think great coaches who coach great players in that time are not recognized as much. And I think you can say the same about some coaches these days. I think Steve Kerr, for just to put an example, does get a lot of credit, gets a lot of credit for what he's done with the Warriors. I think a guy like Spoelstra before was not getting any credit for what he did with LeBron and Wade. And now we're giving him credit now because we've seen him do it for a sustained amount of time. And it is interesting to see that because Nick Nurse, for example, got more credit because of what he did with a younger team, and then in 1 year being able to win a championship. I guess you give obvious credit to Greg Popovich, because he had teams that played in such a fantastic way together, and it was obvious that it was system based. It wasn't just you throw Kobe or MJ out there. But I think as a leader, even if it just doesn't come down to X's and O's, just to break down into who he is as a person, it was fascinating to learn more about it and really see what it takes to lead such unbelievable characters like Jordan and Kobe. I think to think about it that way, to have an impact and have an influence and be a true leader to guys who are geniuses, like basketball geniuses, not just athletic talent, as people, they're fiends. This is all they care about. It's trying to teach an Einstein, to be passionate about physics. They're so, and I think that's what's really interesting with not just learning about Phil Jackson, but listening to how Kobe talked about the game too, and talked about Phil Jackson and how he wanted to learn. He's just he's a maniac. He was a maniac, and to be a leader of a guy like that, that takes a lot, and it teaches us a lot too.
Yeah, no, that's the big thing about leadership. Obviously, like you mentioned, Tex Winter, it was his ideas about actually how the team would play, but Phil Jackson was the one in charge. He was managing the personalities. He was getting the guys to buy into this and believe in this and to really come together as the group. And that's why not all people are made to be leaders. Not every great coach can be a great manager or be great in the front office. It just doesn't work that way. You have to have the right elements of your personality. And obviously Phil Jackson did it in such an amazing way that he was able to really get these fiends and these guys that absolutely had the power, if they wanted to at any moment, to have got him fired. But that never happened because they always believed in what he was preaching. MJ was willing to retire once the Bulls weren't going to bring Phil Jackson back. That's the buy-in that he had there. And I'm sure Kobe would have been at a similar level. Obviously when Phil Jackson left the first time, then they had that couple of years, and then they had to get him back, and Kobe knew they needed him back, and then they were able to win again. That's just the way that it was. The impact that he had on their careers, it can't be understated, and his impact across the NBA is something that will last forever.
Yeah, and I think one last thing I want to think about that is the amount of characters that he had to manage, like especially with the Bulls, like managing and with the Lakers, managing Kobe and Shaq, like such massive personalities, and managing Dennis Rodman, managing Scottie Pippen, Michael Jordan, like the guys who, probably in any other environment under any other leader probably wouldn't have made it that long together. Probably would not have. And you look across the league today, and how many players, how many teams don't stick together because it's all up to the players, right? It's like, and it's almost up to like the management to be like, okay, we need to make sure we get people in here that they play nice and they do well together and all that. But it's rare to see, a coach that has that influence and that structure to be able to corral those sorts of personalities and get people to unite under a common goal. Like we don't always see that. And there's always talk on all the great teams across the league of, if people are getting along, and we always blame the coaching for there not being enough harmony, but maybe it is true. It's like that takes really a truly great leader for guys who really wouldn't work well together, but have the talent to buy in. And I think that's impressive in itself.
Yeah, maybe that's like it's always interesting to see, especially in these days of the super teams and everything like that. If there was a coach like a Phil Jackson, even if someone like a Steve Kerr or Greg Popovich had the opportunity to be coaching a super team, it'd be interesting to see if it actually could. That type of personality would be able to make it work. Well, obviously, we've seen it fail for the most part when the super teams get built, but it's definitely interesting. It's a dying breed of the element of Phil Jackson.
So if you have Phil Jackson, you threw him on the Nets in year one of Harden, Kyrie, and Durant, would Phil Jackson have used his Buddhist magic and Native American ceremony roots? Would that have all fixed that? And actually, I mean, it is interesting how he would have, if we're putting this hypothetical together for real, how he would have related to Kyrie on that level, because I know Kyrie really is involved with his Native American roots. But could a guy like Phil Jackson, could he have kept them together on one team?
I'd like to think he could. Maybe not the element of just Kyrie's the extra bit of craziness, the whole COVID and that sort of thing. I don't know what Phil Jackson's idea
sounds COVID for just taking COVID out of the equation.
And Harden being the way that he is as well. But I think if the way he was able to do it before, the personalities he had to manage were at the highest level of difficulty, and he was able to do it. So yeah, I think he could have made something work there.
Yeah.
That's the mistake you made, Brooklyn. You didn't get Phil Jackson to become coach those Nets. That was your problem.
Yeah, and so they brought in a first-time head coach that had never managed other personalities before. So
genius. Should have brought Phil Jackson in, but cut it out there. Good Phil Jackson, the GOAT, the personality. Get to know him. It's not just all about the winning. There's a lot more that comes into it. And if you're looking for a new book, Phil Jackson's book, the 11 Rings, it really is a great read, because you really get an insight into everything that made him the success that he was. So now, before we get to our tier list, I got a top 5 for you. There's a new segment we're bringing in, Ronan's top 5.
Phil agree with all of it.
I'm looking at players most likely to be traded.
Oh, okay.
We'll say the top 5 for this season. At number 5, I have Giannis written down here.
What?
Only for fun. Because don't get me wrong, I do not believe for a second that he will get traded
just to stir the pot
during the regular season. It's just the fact that it's actually kind of in the air. That's literally it. Like, there's no way he's getting traded during the regular season. That's not happening. It doesn't matter how bad the Bucks are doing. All the rest of their players are injured, and it's just Giannis and his 2 brothers out on the court. He'll stay with Milwaukee for a threat this season, and maybe I should throw Buddy Hield in there instead. Obviously, apparently he's on the trade market now as extension talks broke down with the Pacers, so that could be an interesting one to keep an eye on. Number 4, the guy we've talked about a lot, Pascal Siakam. I just think he's way ahead of the team that he's currently on, and I think that a move is likely there. Number 3 is a bit up in the air. Karl Anthony Towns. Tough to say that it's going to happen, but you never know what way the team works in the first few months of the season. That's a deal that could materialize. Then number 2, obviously, Damian Lillard. Likely going to be going to the Miami Heat, but rumors and talks over the last while is that there's other teams trying to get into the trade talk. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. And then at number 1, James Harden. I think he's the most likely to be traded because I think he's just created an untenable situation in Philly, and it would just be best for the 76ers to get rid of him. And that's why I think he's the most likely to be traded before the deadline. What do you think?
Dude, so I'll rifle off thoughts on that. So 1, Giannis, the only way he gets traded is if he demands a trade, and I think that happens more so next year. If Giannis is traded, that's maybe next year. If there's another really bad run this year and he demands a trade, that would be out of character for him. But just the way it's progressed over the past couple of years and the way that he's talked about it, I think it's clear that that's on the table. For Siakam, we've talked about him a few times, and I think that in a league today where anybody has a chance at winning, there's not any favorites really. He's a guy like the perfect candidate on a team that is in between, not really contending, has too much talent, really needs to consolidate, and a young guy at Siakam's position who they want to develop. Like that's the ideal. If I'm saying number 1 star who's going to get traded, it has to be him. The obvious ones are Dame and Harden, but it's so much harder to trade guys like that. Like they want to leave, but it's so hard to get a deal that makes sense. Siakam, I think there's a lot more ways it can make work with the assets that they have there. Thinking about Cat, I think the reason that he would get traded this season is if Anthony Edwards just takes that next big leap.
Yeah.
Anthony Edwards takes that next big leap, and it's clear on the floor that it's not because of Cat. If Cat kind of stays a little stagnant this year and defensively it's still really not working out, I think there's a world in which, Cat brings you back a lesser return. But if that means like making your defense make sense, making the perimeter a lot stronger, getting in some true wings that can help out here, like that would complement a rising star like Anthony Edwards. It doesn't matter if Cat's a really great shooting big man, really, really interesting player. Like it would be all about Ant. So if he takes that next step, I would expect that. Mm-hmm. Damon Harden, who knows, man? It's like I was texting you about this earlier. The fact that they have these new fines in place for players who are healthy but resting, and that just the minimum amount of games played. I haven't looked into the exact details, but essentially on day 1, as they're not going to be playing, there's going to be fines being thrown their way, and there's zero movement on either front. So I don't know, do they play because they have to now? And if they play and they get hurt, then that just is like, that would just be such a disaster for everybody involved. But I'm sick of the Harden and the Dame talk, because it's just like that's the only thing anyone can talk about, and it's something that hasn't happened at all. And eventually, I think we're going to be surprised with the team that they end up going to, because it's clear that in negotiations before, if not really come even close.
Yeah, I feel like I put Harden at 1 and Dame at 2 because I just feel like it's a bit more realistic that Dame just accepts that there wasn't a good enough trade for Portland to make, and he continues to play there. I don't think he's burnt any bridges, or he's too like angry or upset with any of the hierarchy or anything like that. He just believes that like he's in a position where has to win now, and the team is kind of more in a rebuild mode, whereas Harden is kind of made the situation untenable. He clearly doesn't want to play there. He's clearly fed up with Daryl Morey and the organization as a whole, as James Harden tends to do after a year or two. So I think it's a bit more realistic that 76ers go, right, we need to get this guy out of here, and they look to move him on.
I have a fantasy scenario for that.
Come at me.
But what if Dame stays, right? Dame stays, and again, fantasy. Nobody take me seriously. This is just complete fantasy, okay? Like you're a Portland Trailblazers fan, you're half asleep, you're thinking, how could we keep Dame? What if Shaedon Sharpe is just like an animal this year? Like he's a guy who's hyper talented, and I'm not surprised if I'm being realistic, it's not next year, maybe the next 3 years. But sometimes there are guys out there that just have insane summers, and you don't see it coming because no one's talking about them. And then that year they come and you're like, holy shit. Like James Harden kind of had that glow up. Like he was like, oh wow, this is a really great like complementary player to Russ and Durant. Oh, he's really good. And it's like, oh my God, this guy's like maybe Shaedon Sharpe takes that jump. That's impossible. Not impossible. It's very unlikely. But I'm just thinking fantasy. Who knows? And then I don't know, that's a team too that you pull your assets together, you find a way to maybe make a move with Anthony Simons, put together a package to get a guy like Pascal Siakam, and then maybe you're rocking with the team that Dame's like, all right, fine, like this is good, and Dame's playing, Shaedon Sharpe's playing really well. I don't know. It's not unbelievable. I think maybe
it's fantasy, maybe it's genius.
It could be. I mean, dude, the Western Conference is so crazy. Like all of a sudden the Mavs are not there anymore. They're a team that were knocking on the door for a championship, and then Grizzlies not having Ja. Like there's just uncertainty, and you never know what little things come into play. Who takes a jump, who stays committed, who doesn't, and to have a guy like Dame, that's the thing. That's the really hard and depressing thing, is that to get a guy like Dame on your team is so hard.
Mm-hmm.
So hard to find a talent like that. And even more so for the 76ers, just to think about losing Harden here. It's not about Harden, it's about Embiid, and just imagining how frustrated he must be, and thinking big picture, how frustrating it must be for that organization to have a decade of the process to get to this point, for it to crumble because you ended up with James Harden.
Speaking of the process, that's another great book that people should check out. There's a book about the 76ers, about the process. That's another good read if anyone else look for another book and they don't fancy listen to Phil Jackson. It's definitely worth a read. But I'll finish it off, and we'll finish off then with a tier list. We were ready to do this last time out, but we got a bit delayed, so we weren't able to. We're going to be doing a tier list of players that were one-season wonders, one-hit wonders, the players that had that moment where we thought, oh my God, this is a superstar in the making, and just never fulfilled on it. So we're going to be ranking them based off how good we thought they were going to be when they were in that elite moment, that elite season, that elite stretch. So we got E, A, B, C. Chris, you got who's the first guy you got for me?
Hold on. EABC.
Put anyone down that
elite.
low.
I keep forgetting you go elite, because I'm like, hold on. All right, I don't know my ABCs very well right now. We're starting off with E. So who are we starting out? I'll just throw a name out there for you. One guy that I think of, and this is injury related. This is not as confounding as some other guys who just never made it, but Brandon Roy. Brandon Roy is a guy that he was one of the first players that I started to watch, actually. And the magic he would have at the end of games, like one of the best closers in the league at such a young age, Rookie of the Year, All-Star the year after, and just one of the best scorers in the league. And the injuries obviously took him out, but if we're talking about who we thought was going to be a superstar, I'm absolutely throwing him in the elite category, because I thought he had potential to be a top 12, top 15 player his whole career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, he was definitely an interesting one. He was one that was a real big disappointment. I think when you saw the flashes, but even as a rookie, and you saw him play, and you really believed that there was a superstar just waiting to break out. Injuries obviously played the part, but in terms of the initial stretch when you first saw him, I think there was definitely the belief there that there was at very minimum a few-time All-Star in there. So yeah, I think E tier. I think that's fair. I think that's a fair judgment for him. I'll go for a classic, a one that the Knicks fans are gonna love. We gotta give him some love here.
Okay.
Jeremy Lin Sanity. That
yes,
7-game stretch.
Obviously.
My God, he was close to being cut, and then he's starting in the team, leads them on that 7-game win streak, and looks absolutely unbelievable. Maybe not quite an E tier, but that stretch really had you believing that this is a guy who could definitely be a piece on a team that are competing.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, if we're just like defining these terms, like I would say E, like bona fide superstar, like they should have been there. Like A is like like all-star a few times, several times. B, maybe a couple times, but like definitely a competing piece. And C is just like really, really good player. I mean, I wouldn't think that he would have made a lot of all-star games. I would put him in the B tier, but that's no disrespect. I really thought that like Lin was going to be an answer to what the Knicks really needed to really take the next step with Melo and the way just he was competing and like bringing life to this. It felt like the Knicks did not have life. And obviously Lin's career did not have life at that time, just barely hanging on. And then that should have been such like a amazing story. And it unfortunately didn't have the end that, you wanted it to. But yeah, that in terms of story wise, that's an elite story. Just like I watched his documentary too, just where he was at, just mentally, like just like working out at YMCA's and just like barely being recognized by anybody, just having absolutely no opportunity, and just the most random string of events just brought him to such a crazy like truly one hit wonder. And that's no disrespect to his career as a whole, because he played some solid minutes as a role player, but you really thought that, hey, this is the Knicks point guard. This is the Knicks point guard, really.
But then
I got one here. Yeah. I'll switch from a guard to a big. This one, I'm really curious how you're gonna react to this, because when I thought of this name, it just blew my mind, because it just was a few years ago that I thought Roy Hibbert was gonna be like where Rudy Gobert is today. Like Roy Hibbert was a guy that was giving, the Miami Heat problems. He was a guy that was part of the Indiana Pacers being like one of the best defenses in the league, one of the best rim protectors in the league, if not the best, in Roy Hibbert, and a guy also who had an inside game. He was very few guys. I mean, imagine like a Rudy Gobert who's able to play down in the low post, has actual touch, can take a short range shot, face up a little bit. Like he really had such a classic big man game, but where did he go? Like had a couple All-Stars and then just disappeared. Completely disappeared. Did not adapt to the modern game.
Yeah, it's interesting where his career went. I don't think he's quite in the E tier now. I'd like to say he's a B plus, but I guess we slip him. Would we slip him into the A? Would he slide in there?
I would. He's really close, and I think the reason I would give him an A is because of what he did, in the playoffs too, and against the best competition when it really mattered, and that he did it for a couple seasons to a few seasons, and I think just looking at an impact of a guy like Rudy Gobert, who I think the reason that you can't really compare those two is because Rudy can defend a little bit on the perimeter, can move around. He has a bit more of a motor, a lot more athletic. And that's why a guy like Gobert can survive in a league like this that has gone so much further to positionless basketball. But he's such an example. Roy Hibbert is such an example. And same thing with guys like Blake Griffin and guys like Jahlil Okafor, guys like Jabari Parker, just name guys who, if they were drafted in 2002, would have had a nice long career, like instantly. Like the whole movement in the 2000 teens, like that, like guys like Hibbert just really got phased out, just couldn't play.
Yeah. I got an interesting next one for you. This is a guy that as a rookie really looked like he was legit. Tyreke Evans.
Yes, I have him here. Yes.
Yeah. Rookie of the year, 25 and 6 and 1.5 steals in his rookie year. He really looked like he was going to be a legit player in this league. Moving on from that, 0 All-Stars and 0 All-NBAs, just 4 starts in the playoffs, and he was out of the league at age 30. But man, when I was watching his rookie year, you really thought that this was a building piece. It was a really swift downfall for him.
Mm-hmm.
Where would you put him? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think Tyreke Evans. I first of all, I'll put him. I'm gonna put him in the A tier. I'm not gonna put him in the E tier, and this is why. I think there's a learning lesson to be had from a player like him. Just in terms of like scouting, and when we look at younger players and we look at flashes like this, like I think he had such a classic, like unbelievable rookie year. But when we talk about how players are going to get better, like it's so unpredictable. And I think for such a raw player like him, he actually had a lot further to go than we realized. Like the lack of playmaking, the lack of outside shooting, the lack of of moves to get to a mid-range shot. Like really he had was slashing. He was such an unbelievable slasher. But for guys who are as athletic as him and as strong as him to be able to get to the rim, like that's a very limited skill. And when you just assume that guys like him, it's like, wow, he's so good at this. All he has to do is this, and then just add a little bit of that. And that takes time. It takes years. And when you start to see that players like that are not able to add it, I think that's a good lesson in scouting that, you know, a lot of players are a long way away from being a complete good player. And it takes a lot for them to make a jump like that, even if you have a flash. And I think the second thing that actually shows when you think about where the Kings were at that point in time, maybe Tyreek Evans could have become a complete player. But for a guy who was put into a system where, you know, it was very toxic and your star and DeMarcus Cousins wasn't a leader in that point in time. And I don't know if you ever can say he was, but just not a kind of locker room guy that you want to put a young player next to as a co-star, and no coaching leadership, no vision as to what kind of player they wanted him to be. Is he a point guard? Is he a wing? Is he a shooting guard? Is he a second? Like he never had consistency in that regard. So what is he supposed to work on in the offseason? I think when you don't have stability in a team, a guy like Tyreek Evans, he just has no chance. So it's a big what if. I don't think he necessarily made the most of his. He could have been something really. I mean that with the talent that he had, but I don't know if it's that situation, if it's nature or nurture. But the nurture certainly wasn't there, and you know, it's hard for a player to grow into a complete player in a difficult environment, which is why a guy like Anthony Edwards, a guy like LaMelo Ball, it's a little precarious. But maybe you're just a different kind of player if a guy like Anthony Edwards is able to add to his game, is able to become a 3-point shooter. So guys, maybe I'd put him in the E tier, kind of if he showed that despite his situation, he could grow into an elite player, but just never happened.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I got a similar player who you know, I don't want to say is a one-hit wonder. Victor Oladipo, I mean, has a long career and he's still playing right now.
Yeah,
but I think that what really, and he's kind of in that Brandon Roy situation where I felt like he finally got to, you know, he's starting to grow in OKC, and then once he gets to the Pacers, like it's like he blossomed. He blossomed, and you're like, wait, this is like a bona fide all-star. And that was just his first taste of really being the guy and really like having everything put together. Like his skill set was fully put together as a playmaker, as a mid-range shooter, as a shooter from the perimeter. I mean, as a defender, like one of the most tenacious defenders in the league. So just that combination of defensive tenacity and ability, and that his offensive game had fully been realized, for that to be taken away by injury, I feel like I want to put him in the E tier, because he felt like he was putting himself as like one of the like best two-way players, top 5 two-way two guard in the league.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely have him in the E tier. Like when he had that year, I think it was 2017-18. He's 26 years old. He's averaging 23, 5 and 4. He led the league in steals with 2.4. He even shot 37% from 3 that year. And he took that LeBron James Cavaliers team. He was leading that Pacers team. He took them to 7 games. It really looked like that was the first stepping stone toward him being a multi-time All-Star guy who's going to lead the Pacers team into the next 10 years and really reach a similar level to what they did when Paul George was the guy there. Like that's how it felt in that moment. Obviously didn't come to fruition. Injuries have played a big part, but he's definitely E tier, because what he did in that time, he really did look like one of the next elite guards in the league.
Yeah, so that's one guy you think about. That's really it's a shame for the league to lose a guy like him. I mean, he's still obviously there in the Heat, but I have a fun one saying
he's injured again now, isn't he?
Yeah, it's another quad injury. You know, that's tough. But staying on the Pacers, I got a fun one. We have 3 Pacers actually. So many what ifs. You know. And we didn't even throw Greg Oden there. That would have been two Blazers, and we have 3 Pacers. Do you know who I'm about to say for Pacers?
No, who you got?
You think of it?
I feel like I know it once you say it, but in my mind now, I'm blanking here.
Lance.
Really? Lance Stevenson?
Lance Stevenson.
Okay.
I'm saying. So if you look at his stats, obviously it's not like the craziest year yet, but in 13-14, the year before he went to Charlotte, he was just going out like he was having 30-point games. I think he had a 40-point game sprinkled in there, blowing in LeBron's ear. The year before that, like he had just a lot of flashes of I'm about to be next. He had a lot of flashes. I'm about to be next, especially in times when Paul George was hurt. You know, he's going out there and being the guy and really showing flashes of having that offensive flair. Like he had such a flair to the game that not a lot of players have. He has a flair to him that, you know, that's star potential type of guy. And once he finally got an opportunity his third, fourth year, he started to put it together. You know, he had the playmaking, the vision, he had the shooting, he had the dribbling, he had the flair. I don't know. He felt like a guy who was having his moment, and that once he went to Charlotte, you know, not everyone thought he was going to make it there, but people thought like, oh, okay, now he has his own team, like he's about to do something here, and it just completely fell flat in his face. Like I think people thought that he would become at least like a 20-point per game scorer kind of guy, because he gave me kind of, you know, kind of vibes like a Jordan Poole, like where he's on a really good team, but like he's just a complementary piece to that team. And then, but he has his own moments when he gets a chance. So, all right, you throw him on a team by himself, he's gonna really pop off. But I think I'm bringing up a guy that I would have thought would have made at least a couple All-Star games. I would put him in a C tier. I didn't think he was gonna be a superstar, but I thought he had something in the tank.
Yeah, I think C tier is probably fair there. I think when you mentioned him, like it was a lot of talk. I mean, he said the right things, kind of put that in your mind as well, to kind of think that he could be that guy. He did have some flashes, no doubt, but when the fact that he just fell on his flat in his face when he had that opportunity to really go and be that guy, that kind of brings it down there. But he was definitely an interesting one. I like that you brought him up. I kind of forgot about Lance Stevenson over the last while, but he's definitely a very interesting piece. But I think the C tier is probably fair. I got two more on my list. I think I'll only name one of them. One of them I have Isaiah Thomas, but let's be honest, that was just injuries killed that guy. So I don't even want to rank him. He, like, injuries just destroyed him, and it was very sad. But that year he had 16-17 with the Celtics. He was absolutely unbelievable. The outside one I've got, one you might not remember, but you remember Ryan Anderson, Orlando Magic, most improved player in 2012. Yeah, you remember that?
No, I do remember Ryan Anderson, but where did we think he was going?
I mean, never going to be that superstar, but definitely going to be a piece that a championship team would want. He was averaging 16 and 8, shooting 39% from three, making 2.7 a game. Then after that year, he joins a Pelicans team that doesn't even reach the playoffs, and things just start to deteriorate, a few injuries and it just goes downhill. But in that year when he won the most improved player, you're really like, okay, this guy is going to be a really important piece in the modern game as a floor spacer, as probably a third option as a scorer, a solid rebounder for his position. He's probably in the similar realm of a Lance Stevenson, but he's definitely one that I thought was going to do a lot more with his career after he had that most improved.
Be like I definitely thought he was going to be kind of like a diet Kevin Love.
Yeah,
you know,
fair. Yeah,
like and that was in a time too where it's interesting. Like stretch bigs became like a really hot commodity, and then like a few years in, then it's like, oh, okay, now we got stretch bigs who are also wings and can defend both positions, and we don't need guys like Ryan Anderson. Mm-hmm. You know, like it's the league moves so fast in that way. I mean, if you're gonna throw Ryan Anderson, why don't we throw Chandler Parsons out there too? Like,
you can win most improved player. There you go. Hold on.
He's an all rookie, 2011, 2012. You got a fat contract from Dallas. I mean, they thought he was going somewhere, but any more C players we want to put out there? Ryan
Anderson is my only C guy that I got there. You want to finish it off? You want to show one more to me there?
I got one more that just came to my head. Yeah, one more. Jeff Green on the Celtics. he had like a couple in those random lost years of the Celtics. He had like a couple years where you're like, wait, is he like gonna become like something more than this? Like, because like at his size too, like he was just that classic perfect like wing size where he's like 6'8", can defend like 2 through 4, and has some like on ball ability, can really fly above the rim, shoot the three. Then you're like, okay, like he has like all these talent, and plus he can defend a guy like LeBron James. Like you put him on possessions against LeBron James, he's a guy that actually has the size and the defense to do it. But he's a kind of player that I liken to like a Patrick Williams when I'm thinking about it, like just right off the cuff. Because like as a younger guy, as kind of a guy you're giving more time to, when they show those talents, it's like, all right, is this just the beginning, or is this kind of where it ends? And I think for some players, it's kind of where it ends. You just kind of stay a role player. But for a guy, when you see a guy at that size have that level of versatility, I think that made me think like, okay, this is going to be a like 2-3 time All-Star. I'll give you another C tier guy, because I thought Jeff Green had a little more
him in the
insight.
B tier.
B?
At least he's won a
B
title.
tier? Okay.
I mean, he's gone on to
fair,
have a successful
I got to put
career.
him over Lance Stevenson. Yeah, he's a bit more serious.
He's gone on to have a bit of a successful career. He just never really popped as a kind of as an individual. But in terms of career wise, he's definitely he definitely edges into the B tier. But I think that'll close it out. That was interesting. You think back on some of these guys, you think what might have been there, the story of what might have been that tier list, but definitely a few guys there that I wish I could see have injury-free careers, like Roy, like Oladipo. See what would have happened there, and prayers up for Oladipo. Hopefully he can get back to some sort of level where he's not just always injured and actually able to have an impact on the team. But,
I have to call you out real quick before we finish. Like, I'm surprised that you didn't put J.R. Smith out there as a Knick.
I mean, maybe, but J.R. Smith was never going to be the guy. He was going to be, for me, I think he was always going to be what he was. He was a really good, a really solid role player on a team that are looking to win it all. And obviously he got his ring. He was there with LeBron in Cleveland. Talented player, no doubt, but I think he was always going to be what he was going to be in my eyes, I think.
That's fair. Henny God was just going to be I mean, he's a guy that I always think when like you think about when we talk about like what if like this player had this mentality, like dude, he could have been. I think he was like one of the most truly talented players in the league, like just sheer talent, pure talent, like without drive. Like J.R. Smith, like that guy could do it all. Insanely fun 2K player at the least.
Yeah, we'll definitely we can definitely give him that. But I think that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening. My thanks to Chris for joining me. The first episode recorded with both of us in the United States, and maybe pretty soon we'll get an episode where we're actually together and we'll actually record together. Maybe that could be on the card soon enough. But
we'll at least do one with real Wi-Fi. That will be good.
There you go. That's the plus. And apologies if there was any breaks or anything missed here, but unfortunately, I'm working without Wi-Fi at the moment. But don't worry, it will get better, I promise. So, thanks so much for listening. Remember, you like what you're hearing? Like, subscribe, follow. We are everywhere at Coast to Coast NBA, and most importantly, remember to take every shot and love every moment.
Peace out.